Normandy countryside, June 1944, 2 days before D-Day. A German sentry stands alone on his patrol route, cigarette glowing faintly in the darkness. He's stationed at a critical communication post linking German coastal defenses. Behind him, a British commando moves through the shadows with practiced silence. In his hands, a length of piano wire with wooden handles at each end. The commando closes the distance, 10 feet, 5 feet, 3 feet. The sentry never hears him coming. In one fluid motion, the wire loops over the German's head and tightens around his throat. There's no scream. The wire crushes the larynx instantly, making sound impossible. No gunshot to alert nearby guards, no struggle that might wake sleeping soldiers in the barracks 50 yards away, just silent, lethal pressure that cuts off blood flow to the brain. Within 8 seconds, the sentry loses consciousness. Within 90 seconds, he's dead. The commando lowers the body silently, drags it into the bushes, and continues toward his objective. Station 9 called it the Commando Garrote. British Special Forces who used it called it the Silent Killer. The Germans, when they finally understood what weapon was eliminating their sentries without sound or trace, called it Draht des Teufels, the Devil's Strangling Wire. It was brutally simple: piano wire, wooden handles, and technique. No moving parts, no ammunition, no way to jam or malfunction, just cold physics. Pressure applied to the carotid arteries and trachea, death delivered in absolute silence. But how do you design a killing tool so efficient that trained commandos could eliminate sentries in seconds? And why did this ancient assassination method become one of the most feared close combat weapons of World War II? By 1940, British commando units and SOE agents faced a recurring tactical problem in occupied Europe: how to silently eliminate German sentries without alerting nearby guards. Firearms were too loud. Even suppressed weapons made enough noise to carry in quiet conditions. Knives required extended struggle that could produce sounds or allow victims to cry out. Traditional hand-to-hand combat was unreliable. Skilled opponents might fight back, creating noise and delay. The British needed something that guaranteed instant silence, required minimal physical strength, worked reliably regardless of the victim's size or training, and could be carried and concealed easily. The solution came from looking backward in history: the garrote, an assassination tool dating back centuries, used because it killed silently and efficiently. But historical garrotes were crude: leather thongs, rope, or cloth requiring sustained pressure and often allowing victims time to struggle. Station 9 needed something far more effective. They turned to modern materials and understanding of human anatomy to create a weapon combining ancient lethality with scientific precision. The key insight was targeting specific anatomy. The human neck contains the carotid arteries supplying blood to the brain, and the trachea providing airflow to lungs. Apply sufficient pressure to both simultaneously, and you achieve two effects. Blocking blood flow causes rapid unconsciousness through oxygen deprivation, while crushing the trachea makes vocal sound impossible and induces death through asphyxiation. Station 9's solution was elegantly brutal: high-tensile piano wire. Piano wire is steel drawn to precise diameter, thin enough to dig into flesh and concentrate pressure, strong enough to withstand enormous tension without breaking, flexible enough to be coiled for concealment. By attaching wooden handles at each end, they created a weapon that amplified the user's strength through mechanical advantage. Pulling the handles applied multiplied force to the wire loop around the victim's neck. The handles were carefully designed: wooden dowels approximately 6 inches long and 1 inch in diameter, comfortable to grip, and long enough to provide leverage. The wire attached through drilled holes and was secured with metal ferrules. The entire assembly weighed less than 4 ounces and could be coiled to fit in a pocket.
but the weapon was only as effective as the technique for using it. Station 9 developed specific training protocols, teaching commandos the anatomy, approach, application, and follow-through required for silent kills. This is how Britain perfected the ancient art of strangulation and turned it into a precision weapon that terrorized German forces across occupied Europe.
The piano wire itself was the critical component. Station 9 tested multiple wire gauges before settling on approximately 0.8 to 1.0 millimeter diameter. Thinner wire cut into flesh more easily, but risked breaking under tension. Thicker wire was stronger, but required more force and was more visible. The chosen gauge balanced cutting power, strength, and concealability. The wire material was high-carbon steel, the same used in actual piano strings. This steel can withstand enormous tensile stress without stretching or breaking. Station 9 sourced wire from British piano manufacturers. The wire was tested to ensure it could handle forces exceeding 200 pounds without failure, far more than needed, but providing safety margin for combat conditions. Wire length was standardized at approximately 30 inches between handles. This provided enough length to loop around an adult male neck with sufficient excess to grip the handles comfortably. The 30-inch length proved optimal through testing. Handles underwent extensive development. The final design featured handles with slightly tapered ends, thicker in the middle for grip comfort, tapered at wire attachment points to reduce bulk. Some versions included shallow spiral grooves, providing better grip when hands were wet or bloody. The wood was treated with linseed oil to prevent moisture absorption and splintering. Handle attachment was engineered for permanent security. The wire passed through drilled holes and was secured with metal ferrules, small metal sleeves crimped onto the wire, preventing it from pulling free. Some versions used epoxy adhesive as additional security. You won't believe the testing process. They used anatomical models with simulated flesh and bone structure to test cutting effectiveness and pressure distribution. They measured the force required to compress carotid arteries to unconsciousness, approximately 11 pounds per square inch, well within the wire configuration's capability. They tested durability by subjecting garrotes to repeated maximum tension applications. Station 9 also developed specialized variants. A quick-release version incorporated a mechanism allowing one handle to detach rapidly after use. A reinforced version used slightly thicker wire for situations where victims might be wearing scarves or high collars. A miniature version with shorter handles was designed for female SOE agents who needed maximum concealability. The garrote's simplicity was its genius. No ammunition to run out of, no mechanical parts to fail, no maintenance required beyond occasional handle replacement if wood wore down. A commando could carry one garrote through an entire deployment and use it dozens of times. The weapon's reliability was absolute. It worked every time if technique was correct. Lethal technique and training. The garrote was only effective with proper technique. Station 9 developed comprehensive training protocols teaching commandos precise methods for silent sentry elimination. Training emphasized 4 phases: approach, application, execution, and extraction. Approach required stealth skills, moving silently, using shadows and terrain, timing movement to environmental noise. Commandos learned to approach from behind and slightly to the side, avoiding the victim's peripheral vision. The final approach, the last 3 to 5 steps, had to be perfectly silent, because this was when victims were most likely to detect something wrong. Application was the critical moment. The garrote had to be deployed and positioned in one smooth motion. Training taught commandos to hold handles with wire coiled between them, then in one single movement, bring the wire loop over the victim's head and position it around the neck at proper level, high enough to compress carotid arteries, low enough to crush the trachea. Execution required immediate maximum force. Commandos were trained to cross their arms as they pulled. This positioning provided maximum leverage and ensured the wire tightened from all angles simultaneously. The crossing motion also pulled the victim backward off balance, preventing effective resistance. The physical dynamics were brutal but effective. Applied correctly, the Garrote compressed carotid arteries within the first second, cutting blood flow to the brain. Unconsciousness followed within 6 to 10 seconds. Simultaneously, the wire crushed the trachea, making vocal sound impossible and blocking airflow. Death occurred within 60 to 90 seconds from asphyxiation and brain death. Extraction training emphasized maintaining pressure until the victim was confirmed dead. Premature release could allow revival and compromise the mission. Once death was confirmed, the commando had to remove the Garrote, conceal the body, and continue the mission. The entire process from approach to extraction typically took 90 to 120 seconds for trained operators. Training also covered complications. What if the victim wore a high collar? Apply the Garrote higher on the neck. What if the victim was significantly larger? Use body weight and momentum to pull them off balance immediately. What if multiple sentries were present? Eliminate the most isolated first. The training scenarios covered every situation commandos might encounter. Psychological training was equally important. Garroting someone is intimate, brutal killing, close enough to feel the victim's body convulsing, to hear final choked gasps. Unlike shooting from distance, there's no psychological separation. Commandos received psychological preparation, ensuring they could perform the technique without hesitation when missions required it. But training scenarios meant nothing without operational validation. How did the Garrote perform when British commandos actually used it against German sentries? The first documented Garrote use occurred during British commando raids on occupied Norway in 1941. Commandos needed to eliminate isolated German sentries guarding coastal installations without alerting larger garrisons. The Garrote proved devastatingly effective. Multiple sentries were eliminated in complete silence, allowing raiders to penetrate facilities undetected. German reports noted confusion about how sentries were killed without gunshots or visible wounds. In France, SOE agents and resistance fighters used Garrotes extensively for targeted assassinations. Gestapo officers, collaborationist officials, and German sentries were eliminated in nighttime attacks, leaving no ballistic evidence. The silent nature meant assassins could strike in urban areas where gunfire would bring immediate response. One documented operation in Lyon saw an SOE agent eliminate a Gestapo officer who tortured dozens of resistance members. The killing occurred on a city street at night, and the agent escaped while nearby German soldiers remained unaware. D-Day preparations saw intensive Garrote use. In the weeks before invasion, commando teams infiltrated Normandy to gather intelligence and sabotage communications. German sentries guarding telephone lines, radio stations, and observation posts were systematically eliminated using Garrotes. These silent killings prevented alarms and allowed commandos to complete sabotage missions. German command reported mysterious communication failures in days before invasion, many caused by severed lines that commandos accessed after garroting sentries. The weapon proved particularly effective in close-quarter scenarios. During facility raids, commandos encountering unexpected sentries could eliminate them silently rather than using firearms that would alert entire facilities. The Garrote became standard equipment for any operation requiring stealth. German forces eventually learned to recognize Garrote attacks. Post-mortem examinations showing characteristic wire wounds around necks indicated specialized assassination weapons. German security protocols evolved. Sentries were ordered to patrol in pairs rather than alone, making isolated attacks more difficult. Guard posts were positioned within line of sight of each other, but these countermeasures consumed resources and couldn't entirely prevent attacks. The psychological impact on German forces was significant. Sentries knew they might be strangled silently in the darkness by invisible attackers. This knowledge created constant stress, reduced alertness effectiveness, and contributed to morale problems. The Garrote attacks demonstrated that German security perimeters were porous and vulnerable. Little did the Germans realize the fear their sentries felt was itself a weapon, psychological warfare that degraded German military effectiveness across occupied territories. Once Germans understood British forces were using garrotes systematically, they implemented countermeasures. The most common was requiring sentries to wear high, stiff collars or scarves, making neck access more difficult. Some units issued metal collar reinforcements, rigid bands worn around the neck under uniforms. These measures provided some protection, but were uncomfortable, unpopular, and only partially effective. Patrol protocols changed. Sentries were ordered to work in pairs, maintaining constant visual contact. This made isolated garrote attacks nearly impossible. Killing one sentry would be witnessed by the other, who could raise alarm. But pairing sentries required doubling guard details, consuming personnel German forces increasingly couldn't spare. Guard dog deployment increased. Dogs could detect approaching attackers that human sentries might miss. The presence of dogs complicated garrote attack because handlers couldn't be approached silently. The dog would alert before the commando reached effective range. The garrote itself had inherent limitations. It required close physical contact. The attacker had to be within arm's reach of the victim. This proximity created vulnerability if the victim detected the attack before application. It was also physically demanding. Applying sufficient force to maintain pressure for 90 seconds required strength and endurance. Environmental factors could complicate use. Rain made handles slippery. Cold weather made wire brittle and hands stiff. Commandos had to assess conditions and adjust technique accordingly. The weapon also created evidence. Unlike poisoning or staged accidents, garrote victims bore obvious marks indicating murder. German investigations could confirm assassinations had occurred, even if they couldn't identify perpetrators. This sometimes led to brutal reprisals against civilian populations, creating moral complications for operations. The commando garrote remained in use through World War II and beyond. Post-war special forces worldwide adopted similar weapons, recognizing the value of silent sentry elimination capability. Modern variants use synthetic wire materials, stronger and less detectable than steel piano wire, but the fundamental design and technique remain unchanged. Station 9's engineering proved so effective it required no significant improvement. The garrote influenced post-war special operations doctrine. Training in silent killing techniques became standard for elite units globally. The psychological understanding that effective soldiers needed preparation for intimate violence informed military training programs. For the commandos and agents who carried garrotes, the weapon represented grim necessity. It wasn't honorable or clean. It was intimate, brutal killing required by operational demands. But in the calculus of war, silently eliminating one sentry might allow a mission that saved hundreds of lives. The garrote reminds us that warfare's most effective weapons aren't always technological marvels. Sometimes they're ancient tools perfected through understanding of materials and anatomy. Station 9's genius wasn't inventing the garrote, it was engineering it to mechanical perfection and developing techniques that made it reliably lethal. The result was a weapon that killed in absolute silence and struck fear into enemies who knew death could come from the shadows without warning. For more secret weapons that won World War II through ingenuity and precision, subscribe to World War II Weapons now.